Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym Podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2062. The topic is training, and the title is Programming Trap Bar Deadlifts, Pros and Cons. One of my clients is a personal trainer, and he reached out this past week and asked the following. I have a client, female, post-pregnancy, wants to be strong and athletic. She's experiencing low back pain with conventional deadlifts. Would switching to a trap bar deadlift be a good option? Awesome. So I get questions like this all the time from the personal trainer clients. I love it. It's fun. I'll sometimes shoot them a quick little video or a quick written up answer, but I thought today's question would make for a fun podcast. In Meredith and my social life, somebody we know was asking us about trap bar deadlift to like recommendations for a type of bar or where to get the bar from, and I thought that hopefully this podcast, if they listen to it, could be helpful for them as they are wanting to switch to trap bar deadlifts, actually for the same reason. They had said that their lower back was hurting a little bit with conventional deadlifts. They didn't want to risk the injury, but they wanted to still progress their like deadlifting strength, that movement, and a trap bar deadlift was a good option for them. So let's look at this and kind of compare the movements. We want to start with comparing the muscles targeted by a traditional barbell conventional deadlift compared to a trap bar deadlift. For a barbell conventional deadlift, and conventional stance just means your feet are under your hips, whereas a sumo deadlift, your feet are usually wider than your shoulders. So conventional feet are under the hips, under the shoulders, kind of standing like you would normally stand to talk to somebody. Sumo deadlift is your feet are wider than your shoulders. You can do a quick little YouTube search and see the difference between the two. And then with a conventional deadlift, the bar is in front of your shins. It's a big long bar that has weights on each end, and the bar is in front of your shins. A trap bar deadlift, if you're not familiar with that, you can do a quick YouTube search as well. But that is a bar you actually kind of stand inside of. It's made in a way in which you can stand right where the center of gravity of the bar would be. So the bar is in kind of like a U shape, or it's a hexagon. They used to make hexagon shapes, and now they found you can like open up one side of that bar. So it's a hexagon with one side missing. And that allows people to do like reverse lunges and other movements where your legs have a little more freedom to move. But that bar allows the center of gravity of the weight to be in line with your center of gravity, where a conventional deadlift, the center of gravity of the weight is always slightly in front of you because the bar has to be slightly in front of you. It has to be in front of your shins. You can't drag it through your body. It can only be dragged basically to the front of your body. So a conventional deadlift will target the hamstrings, glutes, and then your lower back is definitely involved. It should not be involved in lifting the bar. It should be involved in bracing and holding your position. So your lower back actually should not be having like extension and contraction, like eccentric contraction type motions. The muscles of like the spinal erectors shouldn't be changing length during a conventional deadlift. Then the upper back muscles, which you're going to hear most notably in like technique and things like the lats, they're going to be involved in holding your shoulder position correct, not letting your shoulders be pulled forward and downward in a manner that exposes the upper spine for injury. So your shoulders are definitely pulled down and forward to some degree, but you still want to maintain natural alignment of the spine, which is a slight S-curve. So the idea of the lower back and upper back in a conventional deadlift is the muscles contract to hold position, whereas the hamstrings and glutes are going to be extending and contracting to actually move the weight. And then some quadriceps are involved for sure, but it's not a really quad dominant movement. But if people have weak quadriceps, it does negatively impact their technique. The quadriceps are not normally the limiting factor in a conventional deadlift, but sometimes for certain clients I have seen improving quad strength help their conventional deadlift. But it's more commonly that people are going to be limited in a conventional deadlift due to core weakness So their abdomen isn't able to help support their spinal erectors, and or their spinal erectors aren't strong. And then glute weakness, they're just not going to be able to maintain proper hip position, and actually the glutes aren't strong enough to accept the weight load as the bar would come off the ground. And then another limitation is just mobility. People are going to have tight and weak hamstrings and glutes, and they're just not going to be able to get their hips in proper alignment in the starting position. So those limiting factors, especially glute weakness and hip mobility concerns, are definitely going to expose the lower back for some strain and pain that we wouldn't want. That would be too much. So there are other technical aspects as well. Getting the starting position correct, learning to push versus pull. You actually want to push the bar off the floor, not pull the bar off the floor. And then learning to keep your lats tight to help hold that shoulder position to maintain normal spinal alignment. So when we think of all that, we now want to compare that to a trap bar deadlift. So the trap bar deadlift targets the same muscles, but it changes the emphasis. Does it target the hamstrings? Yes, but to a lesser degree than a barbell conventional deadlift. Does it target the glutes? Yep, but to a lesser degree than the barbell deadlift. Does it target the lower back and upper back? Hell yeah. Now, those ones are not typically targeted to a lesser degree very much. It would be a very microscopic change in torso angle of a conventional deadlift versus a trap bar deadlift. Very small change in torso angle. The torso angle change would be related to a change in responsibility and stress load management of the lift in the lower back and upper back, but you don't really see much of a change in upper back and lower back stress. Now, the reason why it still feels better is because of the change in the center of gravity. The lower back still has to stabilize and brace weight load, but now that the weight load is kind of beside you or inside of your center of gravity, it does reduce the, I guess, trying to think of this like there's a lot of technicalities to everything, but I would say upper back is targeted just as much in a trap bar deadlift as a conventional deadlift. Now, lower back, yes, I would say there is a reduction. So I'm going to go ahead and say that there is a reduction in lower back stimulus, lower back responsibility from a conventional deadlift to a trap bar deadlift, which is associated with the reduction in pain. The reason why I initially hesitated to say that is your lower back and the supporting muscles of the obliques and the rectus abdominis, like our six-pack, they're still going to be incredibly taxed, and they still often are actually a weakness, a limiting factor in a trap bar deadlift. So the trap bar deadlift, switching from a conventional deadlift bar to a trap bar deadlift bar, allows you to move more weight until the lower back becomes an issue again. So it still has potential to be the limiting factor, but you can use more weight load before that happens with a trap bar compared to a conventional deadlift bar. But then the major change is the quadricep involvement. The quadriceps are significantly more involved in a trap bar deadlift than with a traditional barbell deadlift. So essentially, you're trading the emphasis from the posterior chain. So posterior mean the back side of the body, and the chain would be the links in sequential order from hamstrings to glutes to low back to upper back. So basically from your knees to your neck. The backside muscles from the knees to the neck are called the posterior chain. You're trading the posterior chain for quadriceps. In a barbell conventional deadlift, you have more posterior chain and less quadriceps. In a trap bar deadlift, you have less posterior chain and more quadriceps. Now, somebody might think, and clients have asked before and trainers have asked before, is can this trade-off be mitigated by weight load? Meaning, for whatever posterior chain stimulus you lose, switching from barbell to trap bar, can you offset that by being able to use more weight? So if the barbell deadlift is challenging at 135 pounds, and then you switch to a trap bar deadlift, you feel stronger, you can load more weight, and maybe eventually you can do 225 pounds. Does that weight increase cancel out the change in stimulus? Meaning, if you load a trap bar heavy enough, can you get back the stimulus in the glutes and hamstrings that you would lose switching between the bars? The answer is not quite. Some, yes. All of it, probably not. And I'm going to say no for today's podcast purposes. The upper back and lower back, your core strength, are still going to be limiting factors in the trap bar deadlift before the hamstrings and glutes would be limiting factors. Meaning if you load the trap bar deadlift heavier and heavier and heavier, the core, your lower back, your midsection, all the muscles between your hip bones and your rib cage that are responsible for not letting your body snap in half, they are all going to reach maximal effort, as well as the upper back, before your glutes and hamstrings would reach maximal effort. So although going heavier can stimulate the hamstrings and glutes a little bit more compared to the trap bar lighter, it still will never maximize the hamstrings and glutes. You'd have to switch to like an RDL, trap bar RDL, which now you're talking about a whole different exercise. So if we're keeping conventional deadlift comparison, then you're really never going to fully get back the hamstrings and glutes that you would have lost in that trade-off position. Meaning, if you move from the barbell deadlift to the trap bar deadlift to lessen lower back pain, you will achieve that goal. But you'll be trading quad development for hamstring and glute development. A fun way to test this is if you load up a 15 to 20 rep max for both lifts. And then you just do an all-out effort set. So if you do barbell conventional deadlift for a max effort 15 to 20 reps, what hurts afterward? Like, what is clearly screaming from that level of effort? It's going to be your glutes and your lower back. Your glutes are going to be pumped up. You're going to have trouble walking normal. And that'll be because your glutes would have had to perform contractions. There would have been an eccentric and concentric movement that it would have been loaded against the weight. So it's going to cause mechanical damage to the tissues, to the muscle tissue fibers. And then your lower back is going to be pumped up for sure. So you're going to have a glute pump and a lower back pump. The lower back is going to be, if your technique is correct, it's pumped from having to hold its position and fight against movement. So your spinal erectors have to do basically isometric contractions. They have to fight against being pulled open. So they're going to be pumped from the fight of an isometric contraction, whereas the glutes are going to be pumped from actual movement. So contractions, eccentrics, so concentric, eccentric portions back and forth. So the muscle lengthening, shortening, lengthening, shortening, lengthening, shortening under weight load. Whereas the lower back is going to be pumped, but it's pumped from an isometric hold, which does not have lengthening and shortening of the muscle fibers. And again, that's assuming your technique is correct. Now, if you compare that to a trap bar deadlift done for an all-out effort set of 15 to 20 reps, typically your quad strength is going to be limiting. So you'll get to a position in which your quads are going to be too weak to drive it up off the floor, and or your upper back is rounding so horribly bad that it looks like you're dying under the weight load. So a bad analogy, but a funny one, is think of like a dog taking a dump in the yard. Is their hips are tucked up under them and they're rounded over, right? And that's what you end up looking like when you try to get your last trap bar deadlift off the floor. Is your butt's going to tuck underneath you, your back's going to round, everything's going to look like crap, basically. Now, that's when you're going to end. So what ends up being sore with trap bar deadlift is your upper back and core. You'll have some quad soreness for sure. You'll have some glute usage, but really your core and upper back are going to give out before anything else does. So switching from barbell deadlift to trap bar deadlift does reduce lower back pain due to the change in the center of gravity of the bar. So the barbell, the center of gravity of the bar is in front of you. That involves more lower back to counter that. Whereas with the trap bar, the center of gravity is within you. There isn't as much lower back to have to manage that. There's still some lower back because to pick it up off the floor, your torso has to be forwardly angled. So even if your center of gravity is the midfoot, your torso is still fully forwardly angled, which means your hips go back but your knees go forward. So the lower back has to support that position, getting from whatever torso angle you are at the bottom to the torso being upright at the top. So depending on femur length and basically your body anatomy, some people will have a greater degree of torso angle than others. The greater degree of torso angle, the more lower back is still going to be involved, even with a bar switch from a barbell to a trap bar. But regardless of your anatomy, you will feel less lower back stress switching from a barbell to a trap bar. And that would be as if you equated the weight load. So you still might run into lower back stress as you continue to progress the trap bar. So, how we can mitigate some of this change from losing some posterior chain, like losing the glute and hamstrings basically, by switching to a trap bar, is just do more glutes and hamstrings in your accessory work. And that's going to you're going to make space for that, because since the trap bar is more quad stimulation, you don't need as much quad stimulation now in your accessories. So you'll swap out some of the quad work in the accessories for more hamstring and glute work in the accessories. So that easy switch. So when you switch from barbell to trap bar, just add in some extra glute and hamstring work in your accessories. And eventually things will kind of balance out and you'll get rid of that lower back pain, and you'll still be able to work on your deadlift mechanical strength. Now, I always would recommend practicing the barbell deadlift, because it's such an important movement for life activities. So just being able to pick up something off the floor that's slightly in front of you. Anything heavy that's on the floor in front of you, you're going to try to get as close to it as you can, but often if it's like a laundry basket, if it's a bag of mulch, whatever it is, you're unlikely to be able to stand directly over it, so it's always going to be slightly in front of you. So building those mechanics is still going to be helpful and beneficial, but by using the trap bar for your heavy work, you can now use the barbell conventional deadlift as a lighter movement as part of your accessories, maybe as part of a circuit that you kind of put together and do with the extra hamstring and glute work. So I would still definitely recommend it, but you do want to account for the slight loss in hamstring and glute stimulus. Okay. I hope that covered everything. It was a relatively quick podcast given the topic, but if you have any follow-up questions, if you need anything, if you want me to compare some other exercise changes or substitutions, I'd always be happy to. I just want the podcast to be useful. So if there's anything you want to learn about, just let me know. You can message me on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form. You can always send in a request. We also have a podcast donation and podcast request page, so you can go to that page as well and submit a request. And no matter what email you send it, whatever page you send an email from, it all comes to my email inbox. So I'll find it and I'll answer it for you. But I appreciate everybody who listens, and I hope you always get whatever you need from the podcast. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on the website. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.